Welcome to Survivor Talk Season 2 with Vanity. I'm so glad to have you all here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is where we share powerful stories of resilience, healing, and transformation. Now, I got to give my disclaimer, y'all. Y'all know what I do. If you feel triggered at any moment, right, you can step away, go get yourself a drink of water, take a walk, go take a couple of deep breaths, and then if you feel like you can return. All right, so today we have an incredible guest with us whose journey embodies strength and resilience. For over 2 decades, she has dedicated her life to coaching, life management, and personal growth, helping individuals reclaim their power. Her work has been featured on major platforms like Channel 7 Sunrise, Women's Health, Channel 9 News, and many more, highlighting the profound impact of her mission. But beyond the accolades lies a deeply personal story. As a high-functioning trauma survivor, she knows firsthand the weight of carrying past pain while building a life of accomplishments. Her journey toward healing led her to write More Than One More Thing Can Be True. Today, she continues to inspire and advocate for survivors, empowering them to step into their strength and embrace their healing journeys. So I want you all to join me in welcoming Miss Caroline to Survivor Talks.
Hello.
Hi, Miss Caroline. How are you?
It is so good to be with you today.
Thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for taking the time to be with us to just talk about trauma.
Light subject for the day.
I know, right? Trauma is one of those topics where we are trying to break the stigma, where we're trying to make it a thing where people can talk about it, where they can be comfortable, because a lot of people like to hide trauma. They don't like to talk about it. They bury their trauma experiences. They suppress emotions, and we just gotta talk about it. There's so many different topics surrounding trauma, and I am so glad that you have taken the time out today to come spend time with us and share your story of empowerment and just your journey. So can you share a little bit about yourself and what led you to this journey that you're on?
Yeah, as you know, you read as you introduced me, I've been around for a little while and I've been doing a lot of things. But I come to this work with lived experience. And I think what's really interesting in the trauma space is that for a really long time, having lived experience was something that we didn't talk about. We didn't share if we had our own personal lived experience, if we worked in the trauma survivor, trauma recovery, trauma healing space. But I've done things a little bit differently, and I've used my lived experience as the foundation of my work as a survivor of many things, but most predominantly child sexual abuse. So having that lived experience and then going on to have a range of other experiences in my life led me in my late 30s to make decisions around how I wanted to support others. And that initially started by some self-reflection and doing my own work, and eventually self-publishing my memoir. And then I went on to take that work and use it to speak to different audiences, be it on podcasts, on stages, and work with different organizations. And after a while, it became really clear that there was a need and a want for people to work with me one-on-one. And that's how I stepped into utilizing my business skills and turning that into coaching work. So I did some coaching training, and since then I've added breath work and therapy dog or animal assisted therapy into the mix. So it all kind of sits under this umbrella around trauma survival and trauma survivor support. And it's a gorgeous mix of skills and support tools for people out there.
A woman of skills. You're doing a lot.
Yeah. And that's really my nature. Even the fact that when you read, the high functioning trauma survivor, that it's like, it's my ammo, right? Like,
yeah.
the more I can take on, it's how I function in the world. But I try to make sure that I use that drive towards things that can support others as well.
Yeah. When did you realize that you had that strength to help other people?
It's interesting. I think I've actually always had that drive. I've always been the helper and the doer and the organizer. So even as a little kid, I remember having this moment where I found out I was in primary school, and I found out that a friend of mine had never had a birthday party, and I decided that we, as in my family and I, were going to host a surprise birthday party for her. Which, now that I have my own children, I'm like, if one of my kids came home and was like, I want to organize a surprise party for my friend at our house, I'd be like, why? What are you doing? But I could see that because of her family environment and potentially just the way that their family was, birthday parties weren't ever a thing, and birthday parties were a big thing for me. So I've always kind of found opportunities, even as a child, to look out for things that I think people might enjoy and experiences they might want. And that definitely formed the foundation of then wanting to do more in a greater scale. So I've always taken opportunities to volunteer for organizations and looking out for spaces in community that I can kind of lend my skills. If I didn't have money that I could donate, I could always donate time and skills. So that was always there. And then as I got older and took on different opportunities in my career and in my businesses, it's always been a part of what I do. So it was probably always destined to be the way that it is.
Yeah. It sounds like you really taken what you've experienced and have really turned it in or shaped it into something good, something useful that you can help other people with. And that's a big thing, because there are a lot of people that get stuck, right?
Yeah.
People experience trauma and they don't know how to move forward or overcome. And it sounds like you're an overcomer, right? You made it through some very dark moments. Can you share with us some of the dark moments that you have overcome?
Yeah, so for me, the trauma and abuse began when I was quite young, when I was 10, and that shapes you as a human being. And it wasn't a one-time thing, so it was abuse that went on for quite a few years. And even when I, as a teenager, disclosed, I was believed, but I was asked to stay quiet. And that in itself formed an additional layer of trauma. So there's this complex compounding of trauma and abuse where it's one thing, and I personally haven't experienced this, so I can't speak to it, but I know many survivors are not believed, and that in itself causes a different type of trauma. But in my case, I was believed but not supported. And so it was pretty clear that silence was important, and maintaining perception and public face and reputation was important. So we all kind of just played our roles, and I pretended that everything was fine and went on to do what I needed to do. And that just became the blueprint. So even as I went through life, and as a young adult, when I entered my first kind of serious relationship, that ended up being a domestic violence relationship. But because I had that blueprint from my childhood, when terrible things happen, you just put on a smile and you pretend that it's fine and you don't speak about it and you stay silent. I went on to then blueprint that behavior. So I think it's really challenging, because when we think about childhood abuse, we know that it can take sometimes decades for people to speak about their lived experiences. But when we're then susceptible to further relationship challenges, further damaging and hurtful and violent relationships, it can just create this blueprint for us. And so for me, that has been the hardest part, that I had carried that as a secret for close to 30 years. And then in addition to that, because I had kept that as a secret, some of the behaviors and relationships that I had been around had also been really unhealthy. So it's one of the reasons why I choose to speak up, and I choose to empower people, be it caregivers and people that are responsible for children, or people just in general, to know that what they do in those critical moments around childhood disclosure is so important to the safety and the ongoing healing of that child.
That's a big thing when, survivors aren't believed. And it's another thing when you are believed, but like you said, not supported, that could silence you. Right? Not getting that support probably comes with different type of emotions, right? What obstacles did you encounter with finally saying, hey, you know what? I didn't get this support that I need, but I am going to finally speak up. I am going to share. Did you run into any obstacles?
The first ones were definitely internal ones, which are normally our biggest ones to come across. Sometimes we actually leave those till last. We look for all the external obstacles, the external reasons why we should or shouldn't do something, because if someone else tells us we shouldn't do it, then internally we can not even have that conversation with ourselves, right? There were definitely obstacles on both ends, but I decided to start from the inside out. So I just worked on my own healing and journey, working out why I was going to speak out, because at that point in my life, I was married with 2 children. I had a successful business. I had a lot going on in my life where it almost felt like I was creating further disruption for the sake of it. And I knew that it was deeper than that, but that's kind of how it felt. So I really had to reckon with the deeper knowing and the deeper purpose of why I was choosing to speak up at this point in my life, and why it was important to speak the truth. So that was the first part, working through that and finding that resilience and power and strength to know that when I started speaking externally and I came across obstacles, that my decisions were rooted in solid foundations. And so nothing external could topple what was happening internally. And I guess that's the thing. Like, if you know that what you're doing is the right thing, and you have worked on creating those foundations, and you trust yourself and you know yourself, and you put mechanisms in place for the hard days, then when you do come across those external obstacles where people tell you, hey, it's in the past, why are you bringing this up now? Or I don't really know, it's all well and good to be talking about this kind of with friends and family, but why are you going to write a book? Like, why are you sharing your life with other people? Or like any of those sorts of things that could have been said at the time. I knew that I had an answer for those questions. I had an answer for what could be said, because I had asked myself those questions over and over again to ensure that I had those foundations. I think also for me, being at a later stage in life, I had the life experience to be able to tackle hard conversations and things that I don't think I could have done in my teens or 20s or whatever else, because we learn and we grow as we continue to get older. So being able to have difficult conversations with older relatives, especially older generations, that I don't think I would have had the strength or even the courage to have back when I was younger. There's that hierarchy of generations and how we respect our elders and whatever else, and challenging people that are older than you, especially family members, is a really hard thing to do. So again, going back to that purpose, that foundation, that why, and knowing that they were deeply rooted in the foundation of me made it much easier to have those conversations.
Okay. Would you say with your healing process, like the steps that you take, would you say that, and you're a trauma coach, helping the younger generation is different, or would you say it's the same as helping somebody in the older generation when it comes to?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely really different for what I just spoke of, life experience. And sometimes you would think that it should be easier to work with an older client because they've got more life experience.
Mhm.
But in many ways, it's actually harder, in my experience anyway. I find that the younger clients that I work with, they are growing up and have been growing up in a digital world where they have access to more information, they have access to more stories. So if when I was growing up, wanted to hear and from other survivors, like, you had to kind of really hunt for them. You need to search for their work or search for their books or watch movies or whatever else. And there were some really prominent names in the media, but overall it was hard to find people that looked like me and had similar experiences to me. And obviously the internet and social media has made that a lot easier. And so younger generations have grown up only knowing the world of the internet and the world of social media, which means that they can reach out to another survivor on the other side of the world and say, oh, your story sounds just like mine. And, it's really great to know that I'm not alone and I'm really having challenges with this or that or whatever else. Now, if I compare that to some of the older clients that I've worked with, I recently worked with a client who's in her 60s, and she had never been to counselling before. And she had experienced childhood trauma, but a range of other challenges throughout her life. And so in many ways, it was like learning a new language for her, understanding boundaries, talking through her values, looking at the communication tools that she needed to implement so she could continue the relationship she had, but make changes in those so they could be healthier and more positive for what she needed in her life, especially at this stage in her life. She was starting from scratch. And though she still lives in the same world as the rest of us with access to the internet and social media and all of that sort of stuff, it's not a native language. So a lot of that thinking about, well, if I want this, I'll just Google it or check on this platform or do this thing, that doesn't come as as just an automatic reaction for her. It's something she has to think about and work towards. So I think those stark differences, and that's a real extreme difference of like using the example of a 20-something-year-old versus a 60-something-year-old. But then you get people in between. And and so we have the range of people that might be a little bit stuck in their ways and or that are exhausted because they've just gone from cycle to cycle and they've had difficult relationship after difficult relationship, and now they're getting to a point in their lives where they're like, I want something to change and I can't work out what's going wrong, when they haven't looked at the root cause of the behavior and the things that they're doing to contribute to relationships, or they're not picking up as flags that they may need to factor into how they make choices in the future.
And oh man, that was something I was just thinking about while you were talking, like people being stuck in their ways and versus the younger ones who they do have their phones or internet right at their fingertips, but so does the older generation too, but they don't go that route. And it's so funny because, like, as helping professionals, you'll have some of the younger ones, they will come to the session and they will tell you, they will diagnose themselves, or they'll tell
oh my God, they'll WebMD that.
They'll say,
which isn't necessarily a good thing.
Versus one, they'll say, hey, I don't know what's going on with me, or, it's this, or they don't want to see, they don't want to look on the internet. They won't look at that, and they're struggling, right? Or you try to give them the tools and those stuck points, right?
Yeah. So you have to work really differently with people like that. Like you really have to give them more hands-on tools. It's worksheets, it's journaling, it's like it's doing stuff that isn't necessarily digital, and even having to switch that. Like I'm a digital kind of person. Like I don't have a lot of pen and paper lying around. Everything I do, all my coaching notes, everything I do is online, and that's great for me, but it doesn't always lend itself to other people. And I think that's something to definitely keep in mind for anyone that's listening that works in the trauma space and supports others, is make sure that you always have different versions of your tools. So if you've got an app, that's great. It's great. But there's going to be someone that just doesn't understand the concept of apps, or like they've tried and it just ends up in the too hard basket and then they don't get the resource. So if possible, have elements of your app that could be turned into a downloadable PDF that you can print out for people, or have prompts that they can journal on, or have videos that they can watch just through a web browser versus having to download an app and access it through a particular set of steps. Just trying to think of different ways people can access your tools and making sure that they're also accessible in the ways of that accessibility piece. So, are there captions on videos so people can read versus listening? Is there a transcribe for people that that visually need to read through information because they struggle to watch a full-length video? All of those sorts of things are super important and will help you capture the different generations of people who like to receive information in different ways.
And it sounds like you have a lot of tools to help with this transformative journey for other people, right? When you were going through your process of healing, what steps did you find for yourself were the most transformative?
I did a lot of writing. Which eventually was great to go back to look at when I decided I was going to write a book. I had like pages and pages and journals worth of stuff. A lot of it made no sense whatsoever, because when you're journaling, you're normally just thinking out loud sort of thing. But yeah, a lot of journaling for me. I do remember really early on in my healing journey, and actively in that healing journey, I really struggled with anything that slowed me down too much. I needed to do fast things and active things. And I found that meditation or yoga or anything really slow meant that I slowed down and it triggered my body. So my brain and the subconscious would bring me back to places I didn't want to be. And so I found that I had to do physical activity that was fast. And when I identified that, I was like, but I need a slow thing. Like I need something that I can just do at home or whatever. And journaling ended up being that thing. So I found that I could just write whatever was in my mind. And sometimes it was a full sentence and it made sense. And sometimes it was just words and a bit of garble and it just flowed. Sometimes if I felt I needed to get something out, but I couldn't quite start, I'd use journaling prompts, which were always really helpful to just have. But most of the time, I would just get into a practice where I would journal at least once a day. And yeah, as I said, I used that to then there were quite a few things that I would then note down that I could reference later on when I did decide to write my memoir, because there were some key themes that I could see that kept coming up. But yeah. And don't get me wrong, like I have lots of tools and things that I've created and sourced for clients now. So I have things that I can offer them when they're working through the things that they're working through. But most of the time I just recommend that they start with journaling. And again, like I encourage them to do it in ways that serve them. So I have clients that are like, I really don't do well when I sit with pen and paper or when I type. And I'm like, no problems. Just turn on your voice memo and start talking. You don't have to listen to it again. Just start talking. Just get it out. Do it in the car or do it somewhere where like No one's going to even notice or hear or whatever. And just think about all those things and let them flow and get it out of your system. And so I have people that don't physically journal, but they'll leave themselves a little voice memo, or they'll talk through things that they're thinking or feeling on the way to work or whatever else. And so when they get to the place that they're going, they're like, oh, I feel kind of better now. I got all of that out of my system.
That's good. I never thought about that.
Yeah, because we don't always have time to sit down with, like, especially like we overthink journaling as well. We're like, I got to go and get like a really pretty journal, and then I've got to get the stickers and the tabs and like the colored pen, and I'm like, you just procrastinated on buying a journal. All you need is a pen and paper. Like, you don't even need an actual book. Like, it's just writing things down. So again, like, just trying to remind people that they don't have to overthink it. It's not a big process. You can, if you love it, go buy the pretty journal and do the thing. You don't need journal prompts if that's not your jam. Just get the stuff out, because it's not supposed to be on the inside. Yeah, I know, right? I've had so many, and now I just stick to the basics. I've got, like, it's just plain on the outside. It's a page for a day. I journal every night, and that's me. But I've had some really gorgeous ones in the past that while I've been procrastinating.
I still have to go find me a cute little journal. Like, I'll go to the TJ Maxx or the Marshalls where they have the stationery supplies, and they'll have the little cute books, because I feel like I just go through them. And if they are playing, that this is for the artists, you can get a little creative, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the other thing. Like, journaling doesn't need to be just writing. You know, if you are creative, like, get all your stuff out. Like, draw, scribble, doodle, do whatever you need to do to get those feelings and thoughts out of your body and mind.
Yeah, I love that. I really love that. And I think, you know, everybody, it's coping. It's a way to cope with different emotions. They have so many different tools and things that people can do so they can be able to express those negative emotions or even positive emotions too, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Sometimes there can be positive emotions that you may feel after overcoming trauma, right? Like feeling strong, right? Some things like that. You mentioned using your story to help others, right? I know you said that your story, you were inspired to share your story. How do you inspire others to share their story?
I am a really big believer in that concept that you can't be what you can't see. And being a woman of color in a predominantly white country, you know, we have a similar complex history to the US.
What country are you in?
I'm in Australia. If no one has picked up my accent by now, they're probably like, what is she saying?
Australia, you
I'm hoping that my accent isn't too strong where, like, certain words people are like, I don't know what she's talking about. So I wasn't born in Australia, and I'm an immigrant here, but I've grown up here. And being a person of color and an immigrant in a country that has a similar history to the US, in the sense that Australia has First Nations people who were colonized, and then we have a range of immigrants, but we were colonized by the British, and so we have a predominantly white majority here. And the reason why I share that is because as a person of color, as a woman of color, we don't get as many opportunities as white people do, just the way that it works in countries like this. So I'm a big believer in the concept of you can't be what you can't see. And what I mean by that is, especially when I was more in the business world and had previous businesses, if I had an opportunity to attend an important meeting or speak at an event or do something big, even though I was terrified, I would always take that space. I would take the seat at the table. I would take the spot on the stage. I would do the thing. And the reason I did that is, one, sometimes those opportunities only come once and you've got to grab them. And then two, there's someone in the audience that needs to see themselves in you. So that's the first time I kind of really lent into that concept of taking up space, taking a seat at the table. But what I've found and how I've adapted that and taken it into the space I do as a trauma survivor and an advocate in this space is I hunted and hunted to find a story like mine, a story where the person was abused, they were believed, but they were asked to stay quiet, and they did so for decades. I actually found a woman in the US who had shared her story, and once again, through the power of the internet and social media, I came across her story in some research I was doing, and I was like, oh my goodness, like this is the first person I've come across that has a story like mine. What's interesting is, since I published my memoir and since I now talk about my story on stages and people have read my book and whatever else, I get those calls. I get people that go, I didn't know that we were allowed to talk about this, or I didn't know there's someone else that has a story like mine. And especially for young brown girls out there who are living in communities or families where they're being encouraged not to say anything, they're being encouraged to stay silent. They're like, oh, there's someone else out there that's taking up space, that's talking about the hard stuff, but also talking about the healing journey and talking about the resources and talking about how we can help each other. That's how I make space for others to share their stories and encourage them. And I do that by reminding people that when you share your story, it doesn't need to be in this way. You don't need to be on a podcast. You don't need to be on a stage. You don't need to write a book, because it's hard. Writing a book is not easy. But it might be just having that one conversation or reaching out to a resource that you need. It might be counseling or therapy or something, or it could just be going to a somatic art class or a somatic yoga practice or a breathwork class or something where you can share your story in a safe space and start changing how you're healing and adapting that for your own journey.
I love that. You just never know who life will inspire when you share your story. And I love the fact that you mentioned that it doesn't have to be on a podcast. It doesn't have to be in front of a whole lot of people. It can literally be next to the person that you're sitting next to.
And I've had so many of those examples. I have a really dear friend of mine, and we actually met because we did some work together. And I was running my other business and my previous business, and I had booked her as a freelancer to work on a particular project. And we were just running through a brief one day in a meeting, and I said to her, I'm contactable pretty much 24/7, but if you contact me on a Friday, I normally have my phone off because I'm writing at the moment, and that's my writing day. And I turn everything else off. If not, I'll get distracted. And she was like, oh, okay, like what's your book about? And she happened to catch me on a day where I wasn't too guarded, and I told her it was about child sexual abuse and my lived experience of that, and that I was 10, and I just shared a few details, and that was kind of it. In that moment, she then disclosed to me and shared that she had a similar experience. What I would go on to find out almost 12 months later is she had never told anyone that had happened to her. I didn't know at the time that it was the first time she had disclosed, and she's now on her own journey of healing, and we're very good friends, and it's really beautiful to be able to support her as she's gone on to do many very brave things in her lifetime since then. But in that exact moment, I just thought I was having a conversation with another survivor, probably another survivor that had talked to other people and maybe was further along their journey or whatever else. I had no idea. And even when she told me, I was like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? Especially because we were good friends at that stage, and I was completely baffled that she had never told a single person. So you don't know. You never know. Like when you share your story, you don't know who you're talking to, who's in the room, who's listening, or who's going to advocate for that person. So it might be that you're sharing your story and someone hears this podcast and they're like, oh my God, this lady from Australia with the Aussie accent, I need to send you this podcast because I think that something she said was like, you've got to hear this. And when we advocate for others in the community, that's also really powerful.
I love advocating, being the voice for the voiceless or for the ones who have not yet found their voice, because we are hoping that they find their voice one day and use it. Yes. Right? There's power in the voice. There's power in sharing your story because it does something. It unlocks your soul out of bondage, right? Helps you be free. Right. And part of that is being in community and building those connections. And it sounds like that you have made some connections, some powerful connections with community from sharing your story and your journey. Right. What roles would you say that community has played in your healing journey?
Yeah, I don't think I would be as far along if it wasn't for community. And that kind of falls in a few different categories. I have distanced myself or estranged myself from different people in my life over the years due to the trauma and abuse, but also due to people sometimes just don't have the capacity or the skill to support you in the way that you need, and you've got to set boundaries. And that's been really sad and unfortunate because you want to hold on to people for your whole life, but we know that people are sometimes in our lives for a season and they're not aligned long term. And there was definitely a point where I was like, oh, goodness me, if I keep distancing myself from people, am I just going to end up really alone? And when I realized it wasn't the case at all, it was just that I needed to find my people. I needed to find my chosen family. I needed to find my dear, dear friends in that really tight-knit circle that I have. And I think for me, community and relationships starts really close and then it kind of filters out. And so I've got people at these different layers of that ripple where they're like my super close people, or there's people kind of in that broader community, and it goes out and out and out. And what's great is that I know that I've got this gorgeous network of people that either I support or they support me, and it's a mutually beneficial relationship in that way, but also that we all advocate for each other in different ways as well. When I used to live in a different part of Australia, and I've lived where I currently live now for about 2 years. And when I moved here, I was like, I know this area, I love it, but I feel really lonely. And I realized that I had to start again. I had to start by meeting new people and getting out into the community. And so that's what I've actively done. And it's really lovely now that I can go to local spaces for different things and get different things from those community groups. And people know who I am and know the work that I do. And even just this morning at the gym, I had one of the women say to me, oh, I was chatting to this other woman and I mentioned that she should chat to you. And I was like, oh, what, what's going on? And she's like, oh, she's just having some trouble sleeping. And I thought you might be able to do some breath work with her or reference a few things for her. And I was like, oh yeah, of course I can. I'll mention it to her next time I see her. I can text her a few like audio tracks that I've recorded and whatever. And it was so simple. Like it wasn't about trauma. It wasn't about anything big and heavy. It was just someone that was like, you need this thing. I know Caroline can help you. And the fact that I've created that awareness in community where people know that I am a helper, like we talked about from when I was little, and that I can support people in that space is really gorgeous, because I get to give back to the community because I already get so much out of the community.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned how when you were eliminating people out of your life,
At first you're like, oh my God, I'm not going to have any friends. Like, where is everyone? Oh wait, I got rid of them.
Then that the feelings of loneliness could pop up, or maybe that you're isolating, right? But it's just like, no, you're making room for the right people, because everybody can't go along with you on the journey. And I think there needs to be emphasis on that just because somebody doesn't go along with you on the journey to your next season or to the next phase of your life, it doesn't mean that they're a bad person. Doesn't mean
it's all about capacity, right? They just don't have the capacity or the understanding, and you got to meet people where they're at. And if you need to keep going and they want to stay there, you can't drag them along. So you
right.
Just, okay, cool.
Everybody's in a different place and space in their lives, and sometimes the course just goes that way, but sometimes it'll come back. You just never know, right?
Yeah,
you mentioned your younger self.
Yes.
So I do want to ask you a question in regards to that. With your trauma experiences and where you are now, I know as helping professionals, some ask this question. They use it as assignments in the therapy sessions or the coaching sessions. They say, what would you tell your younger self? What would you tell your younger self? Or what advice would you give to the younger version of you, being where you are now?
I have answered this question so many times in so many different ways, and I'm really grateful that I'm now able to give this answer, because I've definitely done I would have told her blah, 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 and it's a bit of a list and whatever. But now when I think about it, and it may be like, I'm 42. So I'm like at this point in my life, my kids are a bit older. I feel really old. And I'm tired. Like, I'm like, oh, I know 42 is not old, but like,
you don't look old at all. And
but
you're not old. Because
I'm not old. I guess that like my childhood self was a long time ago. What would I tell her? To be perfectly honest, I would tell her that she's doing an amazing job.
Hey.
I wouldn't even worry her with any to-do list, anything to change, because that young girl is in survival mode, and she is doing exactly what she needs to do to get us to this 42-year-old version. There is nothing else that I would expect her to do differently, because I know how difficult, like, a 10-year-old doesn't have the capacity to speak up and do something different. Like, they can't pack their bags and move out and get a job. Like, they're 10. They don't have, I didn't have the life skills. I didn't have the finance. I didn't get the support that I needed from the adults around me. So because of all of that, because of the odds stacked up against her and me, you're doing a great job. And just keep doing what you're doing, because what you're doing means we survive another year and another year and another year, and we keep going and we keep going. And one day we get to just live our lives and give back to others and support other people who are going through that. And we get to do really, really great work. And I get emotional even thinking about that, because we're always exactly where we need to be, even when we hate it, even when we hate being where we are. There's a reason, there's a purpose. So, yeah, just keep doing the thing, because you're doing a great job.
That was a beautiful answer. And I know it looks different for everybody, and it should be, but you have come a very long way, and it is clear that you have done the work. And I think that young girl, that younger version of yourself, will be proud of where you are today.
Yeah, I always think about Especially like because I've got kids of my own, and I always think like, if I had met me, would I be like, oh, that lady, like, why is she so old and I don't want to hang out with her? Or I'd be like, oh, she's really cool, I want to hang out with her. I'm like, I think she'd think I was pretty cool. Let's hope so.
What would you want people to understand about survivor trauma or adversity?
I don't know if it's controversial, but I have a really clear opinion on the concept of trauma, or what we talk about when it comes to trauma healing. I don't believe that we get over trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't. I think we carry it with us forever. Mm-hmm. And the way that I help people understand that is, when you think back to a beautiful memory, like one of your favorite memories, it could be the first time you tried your grandma's apple pie, or it could be the first kiss you had with the love of your life, or when you saw your child for the first time, or it could be anything. A holiday you went on where you just had the best day and you can't fault that entire day. When you think about those experiences, especially ones that trigger more than one sense, so a meal, a kiss, an embrace, or something, they trigger visceral reactions in us, and we carry those memories with us. Like when you're in your 80s, someone's going to say, what's your favorite meal? And you're going to be able to say, it's this meal that my grandma made, and she used to make it when I was little, and and it had these flavors, and your mouth's going to water, and you're going to remember that. Now, trauma is not a beautiful memory. It's not a joyous memory, but it's a visceral one. And in the same way we carry those other memories and they are embedded in our bodies, we carry trauma and they impact us in a visceral way. The difference is we want to remember the joyous memories, but we want to manage the other memories. We want to manage the traumatic memories and the triggers around those.
Yeah.
So what I tell people is that if you convince yourself, and each to their own, I understand why people want to get over trauma. Like if someone told me I could take the blue pill and then just never have trauma again, I'd take the blue pill and we'd be done. We wouldn't have a podcast to talk about. We'd have to find something else to talk about. But that's just not the case, not the way life works. So I try to help people understand that if you have this set destination, you might not get there, and that could cause more trauma. But if we can change our language to moving with trauma, knowing we are carrying it, knowing it is some baggage that we just can't get, like it's just, we've got to keep carrying it from house to house and place to place. But when we get to the place, we know where it goes. We know that it's there. We know that if we do X, Y, Z, it causes some issues. We know that certain language or behaviors causes some issues. And we also have mechanisms in place where if something accidentally triggers us that we're not expecting, because that's what triggers are, that we have enough scaffolding and grounding and support around us to move with the moment and work through the moment. That is how we continue on that journey, I believe. I had that set destination in my mind so many times in my healing journey. I was like, if I just do this next thing, if I do EMDR, if I go to the yoga class, if I do this and I do it for 6 months, I'm going to be healed. I'm going to be over my trauma. And it's like, no, sorry to tell you, that class isn't going to fix it. It's not going to take it away. It's in you forever. And you get to choose how you move with it, and you get to choose how you support yourself and what you do in and around your support.
I think there's so many different approaches to one. First of all, trauma, just the definition alone looks different to so many people. Yeah. And then so does the word healing, how one heals. It may be one way to one person, and then it may mean something else to the next.
People, when we think about scar tissue, I was going to say, like, when I think about, like, I've got a couple of scars from injuries and stuff in my body, and someone could turn around and go, oh, like your leg it's healed. Like, but I would be like, but I have this giant scar on my leg. So is it healed? It's the same concept. Like, I'm still carrying that scar with me from that injury forever. And I may take that, and in my analogy, I'm taking that as, well, it's not actually healed because my leg is never going to be the same again. But I could see why someone else would be like, but it's not causing you pain anymore, and it's all neat and packaged, so it must be done now.
It doesn't hurt anymore. When you touch it, it doesn't, there's no feeling to it. It isn't painful.
Yeah, right? But it never feels the same. Yeah. So,
and there's that thing, the scar is there to remind you of the experience that you went through.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, definitely.
So it's just really the process of healing through trauma experiences. It's almost like it's a beautiful process. It's just like any other injury, right? We're talking about emotional wounds, physical wounds. It's all a process, right? It hurts when it first happened, but sometimes with the emotional wounds, it can hurt. It can hurt for a very long time, but that's if you don't deal with it, right? I always say that there's different layers to healing. That's how I look at it, right? Because you may have one area where you don't have the pain at anymore, but then you may get to a different phase of life and something happens that's new, and it's like, oh, I didn't know that was there. This hurts. What is this? And it's coming from that trauma experience from when you were maybe 10 years old, right? And now you have another layer of healing that needs to be done. So it's a process. It's a beautiful process. I know somebody will probably be like, well, a beautiful process? What do you mean? How's that? Trauma's not beautiful. No. What makes it beautiful is the fact that I look at resilience, the overcoming part. Like, okay, looking at from the other side, like, man, I've been through all of that. Or I experienced all of this. I felt these different things, yet here I am on the other side. And I am not what I went through. I choose not to feel what I was feeling back then when I went through that, right? Whatever that experience is, because it's different for everybody, right? We all go through adversity. Adversity it's just part of life.
Yeah,
come, and we all handle it differently.
That's the beautiful part, though. Like, we get to choose. We get to choose how we show up and the choices that we make. And
and you said something beautiful earlier. You were saying that you look for people that, kind of went with, that looks like what you went through, right?
Yeah, you find others so you don't feel alone. Like, you're all kind of, especially at the darkest moments, like, you feel like you're in this dark room by yourself, and then you kind of hear another voice and you're like, oh, there's someone else here, and they're going through their stuff too, but they know, like, it is the closest to, actually having my experience as it's going to get. And even though they can't help me and I can't help them, just knowing that you're not alone in the experience. Like, the statistics around this kind of abuse are astronomical all around the world. We know that we're not alone, and there's so many people that have never spoken, and we don't really know how much higher the statistics may be, but the more we hear from stories and people, and more that we hear stories like ours, especially from people that look like us and sound like us, that's also really important.
And what I love about that too also is like, you may see that person that experienced trauma too, and it's like, okay, well, how did you heal?
What did you try? How did you learn that thing? Did you enjoy it? Was it hard?
Let me try that.
Yeah, let me try that. Or, when you had this challenge in this other part of your life that was impacted by the trauma, like how do you find marriages and relationships and having kids or blah, 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 like, or how do you find it when you have to go to the gynecologist? Like, what do you do to prepare yourself for that? Because it could be physically challenging for you. There's so many broader conversations around our experiences that can happen in community when we have each other.
So what message of hope would you leave with the audience today?
I think for me, my message of hope is the same message that I gave to my younger self. You're doing a really great job exactly where you are right now. The fact that you're choosing to listen to this means that you are searching for voices and stories and resources to support you and the people that you love. If you're here because you're looking for resources to support others, or if you're here for yourself, or a little bit of both, it's a sign that you are exactly where you need to be. So just keep doing a great job and be really kind to yourself, because that's exactly what you should be doing right now.
I love that message. I know I'm going to keep that here. I know I am.
Well, you're doing a great job because you're here creating this space for all of us to listen.
So what's next for you? Like, are you working on anything that you'd like to share?
Yeah. So I guess I'm sure most of your audience are very far away from me in the US. So if you like this Australian accent and you'd like to hear more of it, I run online breathwork sessions, and I have a few kind of resources that people can access if they like breathwork, which is kind of similar to meditation if you haven't heard of breathwork before. And I do guided breathwork sessions where you can pop your headphones in and just sit there for 5 minutes. Some of them are a little bit longer. So if that's something that you're interested in, please reach out to me. Normally by Instagram, it's normally the easiest way to find me. Here in Australia, my dog and I are starting to do some more therapy dog breathwork visits. So we're going.
Was that him earlier?
That was him earlier. He's like fast asleep now. So I'm going to move my camera and see if you can see.
Oh, there he goes. I seen him earlier.
Yeah, he's just moving around before. There
you go. I seen him earlier. He was so cute. I said, is that the animated therapy dog that you have on your page?
Yeah. So he is a trained therapy dog, and we are a trained therapy dog team, and so we're just starting now to go out to organizations and do wellness visits where I run a short breath work and he does his job as a therapy dog and like gives people that beautiful comfort that he gives. So we're doing that here in Australia on the Gold Coast where we live. And then coaching for anyone that may be interested and likes my concepts and theories on how to move with trauma. I run coaching for anyone, anywhere in the world. So I've definitely coached with people overseas and can do so because we just do it via online. So all of that information is available on my website.
What's your website?
It's carolinebrunne.com.
Okay.
All pretty easy to find.
And where can they find you on Instagram or with social media?
Instagram is Caroline_Brunne. Facebook is the same. LinkedIn is the same. Louis has his own little page called Deep Breaths with Louis. Most of it's really similar content to what you'll see on my stuff, though, because we obviously we're a team. We're always together. Mm-hmm. And yeah, the Instagram is the best place to look for those little breathwork pieces and the platform that I spend most of my time on. So if someone wants to send me a message because they would like to hear more about my coaching or whatever else, it's normally the easiest place to find me.
Okay. Well, we want to thank you. When I say me and the audience want to thank you for taking the time. Listen, I have my little therapy dog
I'm
here
like, I
too.
can hear your dog too. What did you do? Don't just talk about Caroline's dog.
It's like they just come out of nowhere, like, okay, are you done yet?
Yeah, exactly.
But yes, she offers coaching. They have the therapy dog. That is something that a lot of people don't know about, right? But thank you again for coming on to Survivor Talks and sharing your strength with us and sharing how you're resilient and what you do and just, pouring hope into the people, because there are a lot of hopeless people out here. And there are a lot of people who are hurting and carrying a lot of pain and that are waiting to be set free. And I know there's something that you said, whether it's one sentence or all of it, that will help somebody take the next step into their healing journey. So I want to thank you again. If you all to connect with Miss Caroline. And thank you all. I will see you on Survivor Talks on our next episode on Thursday. Blessings.